April 1945. The war in Europe is nearly over. For 10 individuals who live through the chaos and the horror, these final 10 days will shape the rest of their lives. The Western Allies have swept through Germany and Italy, destroying the fascist Axis. The Soviet army has hacked its way to the heart of Berlin and is about to take Hitler's government house. Russian hordes rampage through the streets, terrorizing the inhabitants. Hiding in his bunker beneath the devastated city, Hitler is not only losing the war, he's losing his mind. Intelligence reports say he plans to continue the war from his fortress in the Alps. While Eisenhower sends troops to the mountains, a new threat looms in the north. The Russians occupy Eastern Europe and are now marching on Denmark. British troops race north to cut them off. The next 10 days will change their lives and the world forever. 29th of April, 9 days to victory. The Germans still hold Western Holland in their deadly grip. They have cut off all food supplies to punish the inhabitants for aiding the Allies. Each day, nearly 1,000 people die of starvation. Today, the German command in Holland will finally agree to allow the Allied airlift to bring in food to relieve the famine. At Royal Air Force bases in England, Lancaster bombers prepare for takeoff. In their bomb bays, they carry food for the starving Dutch. But while the Germans have agreed to a temporary truce, they still demand total control over the situation. No one is certain they won't simply shoot down any Allied aircraft flying in over occupied Holland. 21-year-old Flight Lieutenant John Curry is with 460 Squadron of the Royal Australian Air Force. As he prepares to take off for Holland, he doesn't know whether he's on a flight of mercy or a suicide mission.
The truce had been arranged. The papers weren't signed until May the 2nd, so that the first 3 flights were really without the Germans' agreement on paper. Germans naturally were concerned about the situation of having 300 Lancs come in from the sea. They didn't know whether it was going to be an airborne invasion, a trick to conquer or at least to put them down.
The Germans place anti-aircraft guns near each of the 4 food drop zones. If the Allies start dropping bombs instead of food, they're ready.
The drop site was indicated by a large white cross with green flares. The only way to let these food go was to open the bomb bay doors. That was not a very precise method of dropping anything. And I remember thinking, as we approached the drop site, some of these people are going to be hit because they've got more faith in our aiming skill than we have with the method we were using. And there were people hit.
In all, 242 Allied bombers dropped more than 500 tons of food over Holland on the first day alone. Thousands more will be needed as the Nazis continue to starve their opponents. That same day, American paratrooper Clancy Lyle and his comrades in Easy Company are sweeping and securing a small town outside Munich.
Is anybody there? We're Americans. Ich bin Amerikaner.
We heard rumors, that they have concentration camps. Here we see these human skeletons. They just looked, like a ghost looking at you. It was the sickest thing I ever saw in my life. We also saw hundreds of bodies piled up on one corner. What the Germans did, they shot as many as they could, and they left before we got there. between the stench and them crying and all that stuff, man, I don't care who you are. I had tears in my eyes. I never seen anything like this in my life.
The appalling brutality of the Nazi concentration camp profoundly shakes the battle-hardened paratroopers.
The worst thing for me, I would think, it made you think that, my God, how could God let this happen? You know, a test of faith, but of course, I never lost my faith. I don't think any of us ever did. But how could people do that? You know, you had to be an animal to do things like that. And some of the SS were animals, and they enjoyed doing that. What I saw there, I could never get that out of my mind, never, ever. I prayed about it and everything else, but it won't leave.
Well, by the 29th of April, the Reich is crumbling. German forces in Italy finally sign an unconditional surrender, but to the Western Allies, who will now administer the post-war settlement. As far as Germany and Austria are concerned, their post-war zones of occupation were agreed by the Allies at the Yalta Conference in February.
In February 1945, the three main allies, the USA, Britain and Russia, met at Yalta to decide the fate of post-Nazi Europe. The Soviets get the eastern sectors of both Berlin and Vienna.
And yet the cities of Berlin, Prague and Vienna can be taken by whoever gets there first. Stalin, of course, is determined that his troops will take all the capitals, and he doesn't mind the cost.
Stalin can still strip the assets of each city before retreating into his agreed occupation zone. In Berlin, the Russians' target, the Reichstag, is finally in sight. They're under pressure to take it before the May Day parade in Moscow. If Vasily Ustugov can hoist the red flag on its roof, his name will be immortalized. But the city is being defended to the death, even by boys as young as 12. The SS hang anyone who refuses to fight.
И оказалось так, что наверху вот этих зданий высоких были...
There were a lot of German soldiers on top of the buildings.
довольно солидные, а мы оказались внизу. И когда утром 20...
When we started to move towards the river Spree on the morning of April 29th, they opened fire and hit us really badly.
Они нас сверху здорово побили.
Vasily Ustugov and his men are on the move, night and day. Severely exhausted, they become easy targets for German snipers.
Our battalion commander was killed. He'd been with us from the very beginning of the war. Our division and regimental chief signal officers were both killed. We suffered big losses because it was really easy for the Germans to shoot at us from above.
Если так рисоваться, там, как некоторые допускают, что я вот такой храбрый, ничего не боюсь, там...
Of course I was afraid. But when we were preparing for an attack, we were ready for anything. You could get wounded or killed.
Можешь и ранен, и убить, и можешь и уцелеть, так сказать. Я там бил прямой наводкой.
Many times when I was firing at others, I was hit. It only takes a moment. Your cannon is smashed. Your men are lying dead around you. You're wounded and bleeding. It's a matter of seconds. We were ready for anything. But even though we were exhausted, we were never indifferent. We wanted to live, but we knew we had to do our job. Especially on April 30th. We were at the center of Berlin, next to the Reichstag, on the eve of the May Day celebrations. The radio, the morale officers, everything was telling us that the whole country was holding its breath.
After battling across hundreds of miles to get to Berlin, This final short sprint to the Reichstag is the most dangerous ground Vasily Ustugov will ever cross. 29th of April, 9 days to victory. After a week of vicious fighting, the Russians now occupy most of Berlin. In the evening, they go looking for the spoils of war. The remaining residents of Gerda's apartment block seek safety in numbers. They crowd into her small dining room, while Gerda and her sister keep out of sight.
Здорово, бабоньки. Ну что, пожрём? Покушали что-нибудь, а? Кушай! Еда! Еда! Ну что ты? Что ты боишься? Ну что ты? Нет, да, ничего. А? Ух ты! Петруха! Старая знакомая, а? Мама где? Ну? Где мама? Ты звони, не помню. Где мама? Мама! Что ты мой маленький? Что ты? Что? Где? Что ты? Ладно, смотри, на, не бойся. Так, ты, пойдем со мной. Не бойся, все хорошо. Так, ты, пойдем со мной. Ты что, не поняла, дура? Давай, сюда! Давай, сюда! Давай! Быстро!
There are soldiers everywhere. They can only escape to the deserted floor above and hope the balcony is the last place the Russians will look.